Hey, good evening, everyone. My apologies for the connectivity issues. We had storms come through this morning that affected our internet connectivity, and then it's been very spotty throughout the day. So I was hoping that it would not prevent us from having class, but I want to come back, do this recording, go over a few things that I would have covered in class this evening. This is week 3 for the course, and we're going to start getting into and focusing on the various assessments. This week will be informal assessments. So I'm going to share my screen and go over a few things quickly. Just a minute. Get to it. So I'm in the course shell. So one of the things I wanted to go over is the slide deck. This is in week 3, and it will be from chapter 6. That's our focus on the readings this week. So this slide deck is kind of a combination CBM / informal. So basically what I did is I fast forwarded up to slide 18, which more focuses on informal assessments. So one of the first slides I want to share with you is talking about task analysis and error analysis. And this is also a type of informal assessment. So task analysis is basically breaking down a task into small steps and actually asking a student to reflect on sub-skills or tasks that they must complete before they finish a complete task. And so that's one way to do an informal assessment. Also, another is error analysis. And basically, it's an assessment method that the teacher can use with formal, informal, and direct measures such as classwork. And so it gives you the opportunity of discovering some different patterns of errors. I mentioned to you last week, informal assessments could even be teacher made. You can make those. So examples could be um, looking at maybe problems with that. Usually it only tests at the knowledge level, but it gives us a quick snapshot view of what they know. Also, years in the profession tends to not impact your test design, and then looking at differences between what students and teachers thought was important. So those are maybe some of the negative sides to it. We just want to make sure that when we construct an informal assessment that we take into consideration really what the main skill set is and what we want the students to have come out of that lesson knowing. So some format construction errors. So maybe some things to avoid are matching items. So we just need to make sure that we go through and are very clear and specific about what we're trying to assess. So when we look at matching items and some different errors in constructing those, maybe columns aren't titled, or there's more than once, or not at all, or not used in directions to prevent elimination. Maybe response columns aren't ordered, directions may not be specific. So those are just some of the basic things that we want to take into consideration. Multiple choice items. Maybe there's not alternatives in columns or rows, incomplete stems, all or none of above are not appropriately used. So just looking at some of our responses. If we're looking at essay, short written response, some common errors there are response expectations are maybe unclear, scoring points not realistically limited, opinion or feelings requested. Then we look at problem exercises, maybe items not sampling understanding of content, use of objective items when calculating or calculations preferable. Completion items, some errors there that are common are blanks in statement, maybe creating a puzzle, trying to throw the student off. We don't really want to do that. There could be more than a single idea or answer that's called for. Looking at true false, some errors there are required to write responses, time waste, negative statements used, and also statement is not a question. Say, so it's a giveaway item. Then there's a couple, other ideas and suggestions in there, for especially looking at interpretive exercises. So making sure the objective response form is not used. And also some other areas are data presented is unclear. Other informal assessment methods mentioned error analysis, task analysis, um, criterion related assessment. Again, that's basically assessing what that student knows. It's not comparing him or her to a group. Checklist, questionnaire, student work samples, permanent products could be simple interviews of the students, just some simple 2 or 3 questions, just see what the response is, and just to kind of gauge whether they have an understanding. Informal assessments in reading. Um, Here are some different areas. It could be in decoding, it could be in reading fluency or reading comprehension. So it kind of gives you an idea of what to look for. So in decoding, ability to associate sounds and symbols, read isolated letters, nonsense words, word list. Fluency is the rate and ease at which a student reads orally. Could be doing an error analysis and also some informal reading inventories. If you're looking at comprehension, be the ability to derive a meaning from written language, answer simple questions about the story, paraphrasing or retelling a story, and answering vocabulary questions, and also the close and maze task. Here are some guidelines, suggestions for informal reading inventories. So, if possible, you can choose inventories that are mostly narrative selections. The second one is choose inventories in which most of the selections are very well organized. So when you have a passage on the form you're using is poorly organized or not appropriate for the purpose, you want to use this passage at the same level or an alternate form. So we want to make sure those passages are on their grade level. When a student's comprehension scores are erratic from level to level, you want to look at the passages and see whether there's a variability that could be the result of the shifts in the score. So we really like to see some of those scores consistent or gradually improving versus high one time they do it and extremely low the next, which we'll talk about that when we get into CBMs. Okay, you could do informal assessments in spelling. You could do what's called the CB8, simply an old-fashioned spelling test. You say the word using a sentence and then say the word again. You could do analyze errors, phonetic ability, visualization, and linguistic performance. You could do informal assessments in writing. You could do written work samples, maybe come up with a rubric so it's clear on how it's going to be scored. Um, so informal assessment technique in writing, you could just compile a series of story starters, ideas for the students to write about. Give the child a copy of a story starter and ask them to complete that story. Maybe give them a time frame to do it. After a minute, you might want to do a quick assessment and gauge what that student's got to that point, and then allow them a couple more minutes to finish. Okay. Another thing with informal assessment in writing is count the number of words that are correctly written, and then also maybe count up the words that are incorrectly used and assess it that way over a 2 or 3 minute period. You could also do performance assessment or authentic assessment. And those are a couple of informal assessments. So on performance, student creates a response from his or her existing knowledge base. They could construct a task demonstrating their knowledge, provide explanation for their answer. Authentic assessment, students apply knowledge in a manner that's consistent with the real world setting. Okay, you can come up with some criteria for evaluating those tasks, okay, just based on um, their correspondence and how closely related it is to the standard or the benchmark. Require the student to access prior knowledge in completing that task. Is it real? Is it purposeful? Engage students' interest and require sustained effort over a significant period of time, and then provide the student with options. And then there are a couple other suggestions there. Portfolio assessment is another method of informal you could use. It's just evaluating student progress, strengths, and weaknesses over time using work samples, and you just compile that. Those are good, especially when you have parent-teacher conferences coming up or open house. You can provide work samples as a student, but it also gives you an idea to or kind of gauge a student's understanding, look for patterns in academic performance. So it's a good way to go back and look at just how they performed over time. Is it consistently low or is it continuously improving? And good artifacts to share with parents. Examples, portfolio assessment could be student writing, story maps, reading log, dated list of books that students have read, vocabulary journal. You could have samples of artwork, project papers, group work papers and products, daily journals, writing ideas, writing samples, and then also maybe unit lesson tests that are collected over grading periods, such as the 9 weeks. Get into norm reference assessment. Won't really cover that. That's going to be a little bit later on. More worried about informal assessment. So that ends the slide deck on informal assessment. Now, what I'd like to do is share a couple of other resources in the course shell. Get over here to it quickly. To give you some ideas on different types of informal assessments. I have a resource in here that is right below where Chapter 6 PowerPoint or slide deck is that I just shared with you. And it's also under week 3. If you go down, it's called the ABCs of Informal Assessment. And so this is a resource that will provide you examples of informal assessment using each letter of the alphabet. So if you start with A, you have anticipatory guides. B, activity called Bump in the Road explains it for an informal assessment. Chain link. So there's one for each letter of the alphabet. So great resource for you to look at and utilize as you work your way through this assignment. The next thing I'd like to share with you from the course shell is the example of where we can locate. Let me get out of this. Let's stop share on that quickly. Get over here. Share an example with you, and I'll switch the screen back over. Get to my 805 resources. Okay. Have examples of the form and what we're going to be looking for. So I want to share it with you and kind of point out a couple things to you. Under sample reports, I'm going to pop up the informal. And I'm going to do a screen share. It's going to pop up here just any second. Back to my share. So in the 805, I have an example of a informal assessment report. You're going to see the cover page, the abstract. Then we're going to have our identifying information. This is where you're going to identify the type of informal assessment that you selected. We are asking you to select 3 or come up with 3 to give to your case study student. These could be, again, informal assessments that you made or some that you get off the internet or whichever one you choose to do. But we're going to explain and name those. We're going to give the dates that we administer and just explain a little bit about each one of the informal assessments and the skills that they measure. The next section is we're going to provide information, background information on our case study student. You can see here where the example talks about, and they're using abbreviated name or a pseudonym for their student. We don't ever want to use the real name. Also, the age and grade level if they were identified with a disability, and then also a little bit about performance in school, grade level, how they performed, maybe some struggles they've had, and then also about any behaviors, also a little bit about their family dynamic. They come from a single parent home, are they raised by grandparents, two-parent home, just a little bit about that. Next, we're going to talk about our test results and interpretation. So, for informal, the data you collect is going to be very simple. It's mainly going to be what we call the raw score. So, if there were 10 items, the student had a score of 7 out of 10 or 70%. Something that's new for each of you possibly is taking data we collect and putting it into a table, chart, or graph to display the data. It's a visual representation of the results that we get to help parents understand. We can go in, sit down, tell the parent exactly how they scored and their exact scores, but if we also can take and give them a visual representation in a table, chart, or graph, it helps them to um, connect the information that you're giving them verbally and they see it visually, and it helps them gain a better understanding of how their child did. Under each graph, you can see there's a basic explanation. Figure 1, the bar graph detailing the percentage of the student understanding and the percentage of skills that require more instruction. So you can see here, Johnny, or this particular student, looks like about 42% of the skills had an understanding. And then it looks like um, upward of 58%, or yeah, it looks like about mid 50%, or 55% actually, needs work in composition, organization, and paragraph writing. Okay. Raw data right there. Okay. So informal, we're just getting raw data and putting it in there in a table, chart, or graph. Okay. You can see also on one of the second um, informal assessment was a bar graph representing observations of correct usage of punctuation. Okay. Explanation. The student used the correct punctuation always in 2 observations, usually in 4 observations, sometimes in 2 observations, and never in 0. So you can see they broke it down always, usually, sometimes, never, with an explanation there. The third informal assessment, okay, they used a pie graph. And so this was a time sampling that showed the amount of time that their students spent on task or off task during a 2-hour period. So you can see 44% of the time the student was off task. 56% of the time they were on task. Okay. So these could be behavioral, assessing students behaviorally and doing it in an informal manner. This student obviously had some attention deficit issues, and so they wanted to do an informal assessment on his attention span. And then they did 2 from some core areas, core subject areas. So you can break it up. It doesn't all have to be on the same things, as long as you have 3 informal assessments and also making sure that you create a visual representation using a table, chart, or graph. Next section, recommendation. Based on the data you collect, you're making a recommendation here based off that information. You want to identify the strengths and weaknesses based on the assessment you gave, and then you're making a recommendation on what possibly should be done with the student moving forward. Is it a behavioral thing that you assessed, or is it a core subject area? And just giving some basic ideas on what can be done. Okay, and then you basically are concluding. Okay, add a conclusion paragraph in there. Okay, also in your appendix, you want to make sure that you include copies of your informal assessment. You can see the student did here. Okay, the rating scale, they used a checklist, a rating scale, and then also the time sampling form. Okay, they created them. This particular student did. Okay. The other thing that you need to make sure that you do each time you give an assessment, you want to make sure that you have included the information on a permission form that that parent knows that you are using that case study student for this class. And um, I know it's summertime, so you may have to write the parent's name via phone or via email, okay? Permission, and just write their name on there. If you're using the same case study student, you simply will just add in the test as we move along in the course. So you can see here, this particular graduate student used the same case study students. So they had checklist, time sampling, and rating skills for informal. Then they came back, used the same case study student for the norm reference, and then they added the Woodcock Johnson. And then for the CBM, they focused on written expression. Each time, even if it is the same case study student, make sure you submit the updated permission form. That permission form is found in the 805 resources folder. Okay. So I just want to make sure that you guys make sure to include that. Okay. The next thing I want to show you is you're going to take your data after you give these and you're going to pick out what you feel like are some areas in need of improvement. And you're going to develop a lesson plan using that data. So I'm going to go down to my 805 resources folder, and we have a lesson plan template. Okay. It's in the 805 resources folder. This is one that we've created and that we use at Fort Hays. It literally, you can download it by clicking on the download arrow here. It is a Word template. It's in Word format. So literally, if you download this to your desktop, you can go in and literally type in the information for each of these, okay? Name of activity, what grade level, time needed for the lesson, maybe a goal if the student was on an IEP based on the data and identifying the strengths and weaknesses. Okay, so literally you'll go right down through and put information in each one of these blocks that are available in the lesson plan. And so you're going to submit all of them for your assignment when it's due on Sunday night. If you have any questions after you review this video and you're not quite sure, you just kind of have a brain block and something's not clicking in, please reach out to me via email, especially since we didn't get to meet this evening live. That's why I want to go back and do this video. So make sure that you include the lesson plan when you submit your informal assessment report. Also, make sure that you include your informal assessments that you use. That should be in the appendix. And also make sure, again, that you use or include the parent permission form, okay, on that. So that will all be submitted as one when you turn in your assignment on Sunday evening. Remember, it's due at midnight, okay? Please reach out. Follow up with me again if you are having some struggles with this or difficult time understanding, and I'll be glad to try to clarify any questions that you have. Okay. Again, I apologize for the connectivity issues tonight, and thank you guys for your patience and understanding. Have a good evening and good rest of your week. Thank you.